Hosina. This brings with it a whole bunch of different issues. Some people think it's really great. We're getting more consumer goods in the neighborhood, higher quality, maybe lower prices. Other people are worried about rents going up. And it's going to be interesting to see over time what happens in Hosina with asphaltização. It's definitely an unescapable phenomenon. It's going on, and there are more businesses that are interested in coming in. So what I'd like to do, well, let me just finish with asphaltização. The highest version of asphaltização that I saw was people actually moving in, not necessarily respectful or people who are working with the community like the Two Brothers Foundation, but tourists. And I met a guy when I was in Hosina, a British fellow named Mick. And Mick had gotten assaulted in Copacabana because it's very unsafe sometimes for tourists in the tourist zone in Rio de Janeiro. He got assaulted twice in a week. And he was in Brazil taking paragliding lessons. And one of his instructors said, well, look, if you don't want to get assaulted, I got a friend who has a place in Hosina. You'll have to live in this illegal community, but you'll save money and you'll never get assaulted. Him saving money meant his owner, the owner of that building, or the squatter who owned that building, made big money. And this is a pressure that may continue to come on the community. We'll have to see over time what happens. But it's certainly true that there's a lot more money that can be gained from holding apartments vacant and renting them to tourists. So there's an economic pressure coming on the squatter community, which may or may not have a real impact. Now, some of you may have come here because there was some chalkings around the campus that said, the real city of God. And then you walk in here and you see a white guy in a suit. What does that have to do with city of God? So we're going to talk a little bit, one of the really interesting subtexts of Hosina is that most of the favelas in Rio de Janeiro are in some way under the control of drug gangs. And just to give a little street cred so you don't think that the guy in the suit always looks like this. When I was in Hosina, and you'll see Professor Sneed here too, this was us in our gangster days. I can pass this around for people to look at. So I'll need it back at the end of the lecture. But we were looking a little more dicey and streetwise at that time. This was back in early 2002, probably, maybe late 2001. Huh?
Isn't there a third?
There is a third person in that picture who has not changed at all. And that's Professor Sneed's wife, Jayla. So she didn't bother looking streetwise. We were trying to pass, but she wasn't worrying about it. So I want to read you something from the book. This happened very soon after I arrived in the community. Onde você mora? Where do you live? The gun was an automatic, and the cop had it pushed into the crevice under my rib cage. This was my second day in. Everything was new. It was raining, the kind of rain that isn't really rain, but more like 100% humidity, like thick ooze emerging spontaneously from every object. It was dusk, and the cars, the people, the stalls selling pirated merchandise in the passerella, even the noise from everything and everyone around me seemed glazed and far away. Onde você mora? I hardly understood the question. I didn't know where I lived. I had just arrived. I couldn't speak the language. And although I had rehearsed my Portuguese before I left, my brain shut down. I didn't know a goddamn thing. The cop pushed the gun harder against my chest. It was a modern handgun. The plastic barrel wasn't cold against my skin. I didn't have a sense of imminent death. I didn't experience any film noir cliches. Onde você mora? I looked over at Paul, who was on the other side of the bus shelter. I hardly knew the guy, but he had been living in Rocinha for a while and seemed comfortable there. He, too, had a gun against his stomach. He was standing like a scarecrow, arms straight out, and the cop was shouting at him and jabbing the gun in his gut. Onde você mora? My cop shouted again. My brain started slowly. Be polite. Show respect. Use the third person singular. Com você, I croaked. It was instinct, pure fear, blind, and totally wrong. Comigo? The cop asked. Sí, com você, I said again. I wish I could say it was intentional. I wish I could say I knew what I was doing. Where do you live? The cop was shouting, and I had answered this way. I live with you. With you, motherfucker, with your mother. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, his eyes changed, and it seemed that a little light went on in his brain. And he finally realized that this strange gringo with a shaved head who was walking out of the favela was most likely not a viciado or drug addict, not a traficante or drug dealer, but most likely simply an incredibly stupid white man. Não com você, com ele, he corrected me, still angry. Not with me, with him. He waved his gun at Paul. The cops kept us there for 20 minutes. They made Paul recite the names of the people he knew in Rocinha. He went through dozens of names until he mentioned someone they knew. José Valdo, the driver for the city's regional administrator. And that was when they put away their guns and let us go. I realized then that there were a dozen people waiting in the bus shelter to avoid the rain. They were all standing within a few feet of us. None of them said or did anything. They didn't even move away from the guns. And it occurred to me that this, for them, was normal, average, ordinary, simply